and this time we're going to be making this matrix style teleportation effect, and you can see it's made up of different layers of effects. Let's jump right into it. We're going to use this model from Sketchfab by Sul. It's a free model that you can get. So let me just download that USD and drag that into a new project of Blender. Just get this. Perfect. It does come with a few other pieces that we don't need. So I'm just going to get the moon, get rid of it, and just select everything. Shift G type. I'll select all the meshes and just clear the parent using Alt P, clear transformation, and I'll hide the meshes and delete the other stuff. So right now everything is a separated piece, but I want to keep things simple. So what I'm going to do is just merge all the meshes. So Ctrl J. Now we have one mesh like this. Let me split my view here. So this is going to be my UV editor, and this is going to be my shader editor or my geometry nodes, because we're going to be using geometry nodes for this. Now let's set up some geometry nodes for the particles. Let me open the old project so that I can explain this better. So all we're doing here is instancing some particles on the mesh and animate them moving down. And to do that, we're going to need these cubes, which are like pixels. So let's make them quickly. It's just going to be a cube like that with a bevel. Let's increase the bevel a bit, maybe something like that. We can even turn adenomos. And then let me make a few copies. I want to make this look like pixels. Right away, I'm also going to set up some materials for this. So let me go to the shader editor. I want this pixel looking effect. So what I'm going to do for that, let me first go to switch to Eevee here. This is going to be using the wireframe node that gives us these lines. Let's use pixel size so that we can determine the size of these pixels, and we can use let's just use a principal shader and an emission shader and just mix them together. So we're going to use this as the mask, and this is going to be a dark material. Actually, I need this to be switched, so I'm just going to swap these, and this is going to be the green, and this is, I want this to be quite reflective, maybe give it a little bit of greenish to it. So this is going to be our pixels. And now for this mesh, I want to turn it into the emitter. Go to geometry nodes and set up a new geometry nodes thing. Let me first apply this rotation and scale of the mesh, and let me also check out the height of this. Okay, 0.7 meters. That's okay. I'm going to use distribute points on faces, and we need quite a bunch of these points. We can even say maybe about 1000, and we want to instance the cubes. Let me call them pixels, and we scale them down, apply the scale. Let me reduce the bevel a bit. Okay, now I can bring in those pixels and instance them on points. Just like that. I can randomize the scale, something like that. And if we take a look at this, you can see how they look. Let me go back to the shader editor and just reduce the pixel size, to something like that. Maybe make this even more brighter. Go back to geometry nodes. Let me use a vector math here to scale down these pixels a bit. If you're not very familiar with geometry nodes, I have a course that explains all of these in step by step, but let's do maybe 2000 pixels, and I want to randomize the rotation of this. Let's use another random value, but this time let's change this to maybe a vector. Let's do -5 by 5 and connect that to the random rotation. Now you can see that we get too much randomization, that it does lose that pixel look. So let's use a vector math node and change this to snap. This will allow us to snap to the nearest value. Maybe let's see if we can snap this to, to 90 degrees. You can see there is randomization, but it's still 90 degrees randomization. You can see this is different from this. So yeah, we get something like that. That's going to be the first part. So the second part is controlling the position of these pixels. We can, for example, use a set position and make sure that they start from up. Let me increase the time range. Let's say they start from up there and then they animate down. To easily do that, we just have to switch between these. We have to mix between these vectors. So when you have a vector of 0, 0 set to the offset, that means we have not changed anything here. But if we switch to this, this goes up. So if we use a mix vector, mix the two vectors, we can use this value as the mix value. And the great thing about this is that now we can also create a gradient that we can use as a mask. Because we want to control several layers of this effect, let's just use an empty, Shift A, and just use this empty. And let me just scale the display a bit down. So yeah, I want to create a gradient to control the factor. So I'm going to use a gradient, but the coordinates, I want the coordinates to be of this empty. So if I just take a look at the original mesh, which is this, and just take a look at the gradient, you can see the gradient we're getting. If I get the empty and use the location to influence the gradient, for example, if we're using the position coordinates, I can use a vector math and add the location. That way, let me just take a look at, pin this. So now if I move this around, you can see how I'm controlling the gradient, and I need this to be in the center. If I rotate this, you can see it's not affecting the gradient, but if I use the rotate vector, I can use the rotation of the empty to rotate this. And rotate it on the Y, negative 180. Rotate it on the X, maybe on the Y, yeah. You can rotate this as you want, you can move it as you want, but it seems to be going in the negative direction. So let's use, instead of adding, let's subtract. And you can see now we get exactly what we want. If I want this rotated, I can rotate it, though it's going in the opposite direction, but I really care about the up and down direction. So I'm okay with that. But if you want, you can just multiply the rotation with negative value, so maybe -1 to make sure to get the right rotation if that's what you're up to. But this has also flipped our gradient. Yeah, we can use that as the factor here. So you can see we can easily have this build our character. But I think, yeah, I need to invert this gradient. Or let me swap these. Yeah, you can just swap this and you will get the effect we are looking for. I can use a math node here, change it to scale, and scale up this gradient until I match. Yeah, I match my gradient, so you can see what we have. Okay, so I think the way I set up the gradient might be a bit confusing. So in the next lesson, we can take a look at how you can create a different gradient. That might be a bit more simpler. Okay, I want to explain the gradients thing a little bit better because I think this is a bit too complicated for what we want to do. Again, we're going to use the empty, so let me bring it back, and let me start from here so that we can easily visualize what we're doing. And I'm going to animate the empty starting from 0, 0. So about here, going up just like that, so that we have some animation. I'll select this, make sure this is set to relative, and what we can do, we can again use a gradient. We can bring in the position, which is basically the coordinates of the gradient. Just connect this and you see there is no change, but you can again do things like add or subtract to the gradient. But I want to just rotate the gradient, so vector rotate, and I want to just rotate this. Let's see, would it be on the y-axis? Let's see if 90 degrees on the y. Yeah, just like that. Because I want to keep this simple, I'm just going to add the location of the empty to the gradient, to whatever we have here for the gradient. So I can use math node here, and you can see as I add to this, or if I subtract to this, the gradient moves. So I can just use the current location of the empty, but I only want the upward movement, so I can use a separate xy to get the z value and add to that. So now if I move, let me just pin this for a second. So now if I move the gradient, we can see that this is also, the gradient is also moving. So I'm just going to subtract to get the opposite, to make sure that the gradient matches. And that's exactly what we want. We won't have the rotation and everything, but I think it's a much simpler setup than what we had before here. So I'm just going to get rid of this and use this instead. It still achieves the same results, but it's much simpler. So now if we take a look at this, when we move this, we get something like that. But I think I need to, let's see. We still need to match the positions of the gradient. So I'm going to come in here. Let's try multiply. Yeah, multiply until the gradient matches. Let me get rid of this. Yeah, the speed is always going to be determined by how far these are coming from. So if I want the movement to be slow, I can just reduce the distance they are moving, and you can see now they are a little bit slower. Yeah, you can see. Yeah, you can slow them that way, or you can just slow down the speed of the empty, and they should come in a bit slower this time. So that's perfect. Now you can see that as they are coming in, let me turn to render view here and make sure this is set to 0. Yeah, you can see that as they are coming in, they're starting up here, but I want them to like show up mid-air like we have in the original. You can see that they fade into existence. So to do that, we can still use the same gradient and use it to change the scale of instances using the scale instance. This gradient here, if I connect it directly to the scale, let me use our ramp. You can see what we're getting. I will just have to flip this, so that is the other way around. So they only appear at a certain distance, which is perfect. In the original, you can see that these are coming from different directions. So let's do that, and the way you do that, you just have to alter this gradient, and we can easily do that by using a noise texture and adding that to this. So I'll just add this here, and usually you want to subtract the offset that comes with the noise to center the noise. So I can change, let me use a small scale and just scale the strength of the noise. Yeah, you can have something like this. So you can see they come from different areas. Some of them are starting from down, so I'm just going to move them up a bit. Perfect. Now you can see that they're all from different areas. Okay, in the next lesson, let's create the revealing layer. We have the pixels, but we don't have the character getting revealed. Okay, so this is where we left off. Now let's bring in our character so that we start revealing them. So I'm just going to duplicate the character, Shift D, and get rid of the geometry nodes. So you can see how the pixels are attached to the different positions on the character. That's great. You can add more pixels by just increasing the density. But to keep things simple and my viewport responsive, I'm just going to stick with this for now. And on another time, I can increase the pixel count. Now, the next thing we want to do here is, let's see, is set up the materials so that the character is getting revealed according to the gradient. So I'm just going to go to the shader editor and go to the material tab. Now this character has several materials. So if I just take a look at the set one, you can see this is for the outfit. Let me just use color RGB. Okay, so set two is for that, and set three. Oh, let me unpin this. So set one is for this. We had pinned this, so that's why it was confusing. Set two uses, it's this. So different parts use different materials, and this is the hair, but it doesn't matter. Let's go to set one here and start working on the gradient. So I am going to use our gradient again. Now let's set up the coordinates, Ctrl T, use object, and this time let's just select the empty. The materials should be very easy. Now you can see we have a gradient that animates, which is perfect. Now if the rotation of the gradient is off, you can just change the rotation using these, and I think I think this is okay. Perfect. Now the first thing I want to do is make sure that this setup is working on all the different materials, because I don't want to go in and set it up for everything. Now that's very easy. All you have to do is select the nodes you're going to be sharing in different groups, in different materials. So all of these, because we're going to be mixing this with this shader, so transparency, I want this to also be part of the group, so I can just mix this, and this gradient is going to be our mask. Since I'm using Eevee, I can change the render method, the transparency render method to blend, and that should give me a better gradient. You can see how, let me first add our gradient to add more contrast. I want the gradient to match exactly where our object is. Now you might see these artifacts here. I think that's usually if you have, what is it? Transparency overlap, is it? Yeah. So without that, you can see we get a very nice gradient that we are going to continue on working on to get a better effect. So I know I want to be reusing all these nodes in the different materials we have. So I'm just going to select all of them Ctrl G to create a node group. Now this is the node group I'm going to share between the different materials. Now for this node group, I think this is what we need. Perfect. So I can copy this, go to set 2, paste it in here. And so set 2 is these parts of the character dress or cloth, and just have to basically switch things up, and you can see now the reveal is working on those parts as well. Now set material 3 is the katana or the sword, so I can also copy this, paste it in here, and basically replace the entire thing, and that should... Oh, I pasted this to set 3 instead of katana. So set 3 is for the hair, and you can see that's also working perfectly. So I'm just going to copy this for the katana, and that should also now make the katana disappear. And any changes I want to do, I just have to go into this node, since it's being shared between the different materials, and make changes to this, and it will affect all the other pieces, which is perfect. Perfect. Just like that. Now, if I bring back the pixels, so we should be this. Okay, so now we have the gradient. Let's make sure that our geometry nodes is also set up correctly. Yeah, so make sure this is the final output. And we can see that everything matches up correctly. What I could do is maybe move the particles a bit up so that they are revealed first before I think this is good. We can increase the particle count. Let's do maybe 5,000. Get something like that, and I can scale down these again. So let me use a math node here, set it to multiply so that these are smaller. Perfect. I think that's good. You can change how far the pixels are compared to the gradient by coming in here. Let's see, where is that? Yeah, by adjusting this gradient. No, not that. So yeah, by adjusting the scale here. So now you can see that they are much closer to where the gradient is, and it really makes it sell the effect. Okay, so in the next lesson, let's take a look at let's see, creating another layer of detail here. Like you can see, we have this mesh or net that we get before. Okay, in this lesson, let's look at adding another layer of detail to this before the pixels. I'm going to come back to the shader editor. These are the pixels. Let me rename these to pixels character. Now for now, I can hide them. Let's focus on this. For this material, we want to work within the group node because we want the material to be added to the rest of the meshes. So I'm going to come in here, and what I want to do is add a layer of wireframe like we had before. If I take a look at that, let's use pixel size and maybe something like that. It's also going to be an emission. Basically the same effect we did, so maybe greenish, and it has to come before the transparency. So let's do, so it should be mix shader. So mix the emission. Let's see, make this easier to understand. Let me just duplicate this because it's much easier to work outside the node group and then group things back. So I'm just going to duplicate this node group, then ungroup it so that I have access to the nodes. That way I can focus on just this material. Let me connect this back. So what I want to do is have a layer of pixels. So this should be this. So this is the gradient. Now actually can be quite confusing, but let's go slow. So we have an emission, and let's have another layer. This time let's use a diffuse. Let's give it a darker material, and dark like that. Let's use a glossy, so that it gives us a reflective material. Yeah, something like this. Blend the two, but use the wireframe to have a layer of these wires. I need this to be inverted or swapped. Yeah, so that we have a something like this, a wireframe like this. Now that's great. Maybe we can even add some extra detail to this, but let's first see how this is going to be blended with this. So remember our gradient, this here. We can use a mix node, a mix shader, to blend what we have here and this using this gradient. Yeah, so you can see how we get a blend from this to this, and I can adjust where this gradient is, where this mesh is starting from, by just playing with this gradient here. Okay. Now, after this, I think, yeah, before this layer, let's create another effect, and that is going to be, there is the Voronoi texture has some interesting patterns. If I take a look at that, I think this is under the Manhattan, is it? Is the Manhattan preset or the Chebchev? Yeah, it has this digital-like pattern that can be quite interesting. So I'm going to use our ramp to adjust the contrast, and you can see it gives us this sort of pixel-like effect. And I think, let me see, if I change this to constant, we can have multiple colors. So this is dark, this is gray. Yeah, you can easily create multiple colors. Maybe let's use, yeah, you can find a pattern that works for you. And now we want this to be animated. So I'll change this to 4D and just animate the Y value. No, actually, let's keep it to 3D and use the vector coordinates. So Ctrl T and just animate the Y position. So to make things a bit simpler, so I'm going to use the driver hash frame and divide this by 50 to slow down the effect. I want it to be in the opposite direction, so I'll use a negative. Let's do 100, just like that. So before even we get this layer here, we could use, let this be another emission value and another emission shader. So this is going to be like this, but I want to give it some color, so I will use a ramp, and let me set it, give it a nice reddish, greenish like that, and that's going to be replacing the wire first. So yeah, so we have that, And after that, we can have a layer of the wires. And actually, instead of using this shader, we're going to adjust it a bit. So this is our wires, and let me increase the size. And I think if we do our transparency with an emission, blend the two, and the black areas, we want it to be fully transparent, just like this, and this is going to be green like that. And we can blend this with this. But this time we want to use the same gradient. I don't want to use the same gradient here. I'm just going to create a copy of this because I want to adjust the positioning of the gradient, and just bring this here. So this is our original, this is our wireframe, and this is the mix. Though I'm not sure why I'm not seeing the, oh, this has to be the color. Yeah, so now you can see we get a nice transition, but I need to raise this a bit. And you know what? I think so. We have, let me see, where is this? I think we can add more detail to this by using a principal shader instead of the emission, and just use the color in the emission node that replace this. This should be the color, and it should also be the base color. Okay, gives us the same effect, but now we can use this mask as the bump to add another layer of detail to the normal. Let's see if that will help. So now, yeah, you can see we get this nice digital transition. And again, lastly, we want to have to hide the top part as well. So here is where is our, oh, so this is our wireframe. So we need another gradient. So I'm just going to duplicate this and just another transparency mixed with this, but this time using this as the gradient. Okay, so but this time I think I'm just going to raise this a little bit. Yeah, so that we have that. But another thing I want to do, I don't want this to be a clear gradient, a straight gradient like this. You can see it's almost like it was cut by a knife. So I can mix this up by, let me use the math node here and just use a noise texture to mix up the gradient so that it's not plain. Now let's take a look at just the gradient. I think, no, let's just mix up the gradient with a vector math here instead of, yeah, so it should, let's see, I need to use another math node here, subtract to center the noise, and that should help a bit. And I can multiply this or scale the gradient the noise down so that I reduce its influence. And now you can see that most of the detail is down here instead of being up here as well. So we get that nice transition, natural transition. So this is even better than what I created. But we have to group this again so that is applied in the other material sets. So I'm just going to grab all of this, Control G, Now let me call this matte. This is not needed. Okay, so this is what we have. Make sure you're saving, and I can go to the different material sets and switch out the node group we set up last time. So this we have to switch it to matte. Go to the second one. It's a heavy shader, so it takes a little bit of time to process. So switch this as well, and finally switch that. So now, yeah, we get that, which I think looks even better. So now if we bring back the pixels, we get something like that. Another thing I don't want is to see the pixels down here after we show the reveal. So let's go back to geometry nodes, and we have this scale gradient. This gradient we set up for the scaling. We can just you add another node here so that it's the end pieces are also removed. And I need to make sure that this. Let's try using the multiply version. And yeah, let me see what's. I think if I use a math node here or another multiply, I can basically adjust the positioning of these gradients. Or let me just use an add. You can adjust the positioning of these points. What I've done here is, since this is a gradient, when you add to the gradient, you're basically moving it either up or down. So our gradient was here, and it was being used as the mask for the scale value. So I moved it a bit down. So adding this value is just a way of moving it to different areas, and that leaves us with a nice transition just like that. Yeah, so that's what we have. So in let's take a look at our compositing. That way we can add these streaks of lights, as you can see, those there, and maybe add some glow to the effect. Okay, so this lesson, let's add some compositor effects like bloom and other things. So let's go to the compositor, turn on use compositor, and here I'm going to just turn on always, and maybe also let me do it here so that we can see the effects of the compositors. So the first thing I want to do is add some glow. Let's add a glare. Change this to bloom, and yeah, we have bloom. The other thing, we want to add some streaks. So I'm going to come here. Let me use another node here. Take a look at this. This time we want to use streaks. Yeah, streaks. But we only want one, and we want the angle to be up. So is it negative 90 degrees? Yes. And we can increase the fade and iterations, and you can adjust the strength to make these even longer and increase the fade. Color modulation, you can adjust things according to depending on what you want. And now I can blend this using a mix color. So right now we have, yeah, we only want the glare. I'm just going to add. So add, yeah. So we have something like that. And I just reduce on the strength. Perfect. And you can set up your camera. So let me just add a camera, just like that. And the camera can track the empty. So maybe let me add. Now let's add an empty to the camera. Just and parent the empty to the camera. Control P, and let the empty track using constraints. Track the other empty. You can use Alt R to clear the rotation of the camera, and that will reset its view angle. So now we get something like that. Now you can animate the empty however you want. And take a look at that. So this is the animation. So we get something slower. Now you can set up some lighting. That's the last part. Let me hide the original pixels here in a backup collection. And that's what we have. The other pieces are just adding background objects like buildings and other things, and you should be good to render. So this was my final one. I added some fog in the background. That's how you do that.